For most of the 1960s, an American racetrack was one of the few workplaces a woman could not legally enter as a professional rider. The horses did not care who sat on them. The men who ran the sport did. A woman could train a thoroughbred from a foal, gallop it every morning, and still be told the saddle was not hers to sit in when the race was run. By the time a court finally forced the question in 1968, the closed door at number 20 had held for nearly the whole decade without a single crack. And when one licensed woman was at last named on a horse, the answer at number 1 was 100 men refusing to leave the jockey's room. Hit the subscribe button. This is a documented record. Number 20, the standing bar. For most of the decade, no state racing commission in the United States would grant a woman a license to ride thoroughbreds on the flat. Not one. A woman could hold a trainer's license, own the horse, and work it at dawn, and still be barred from the only role that counted on race day. The rule was rarely written as a ban. It did not have to be. The licenses simply were not issued, year after year, and the sport treated that absence as the natural order of things. The first woman to break it, the Olympic rider Kathy Kusner, did not win her license across a table. She had to win it in a courtroom in 1968, after the commissions had said no for years. 8 years of the decade went by before a single woman was allowed to earn her living this way. Nobody had to write the ban down. The empty license file said it for them. Number 19, the columnist's welcome. When Kathy Kusner announced in 1967 that she meant to seek a jockey's license, the response from the press was not neutral. One widely syndicated turf writer, Jim Coleman, used his column to tell her, in print, to stay away from the racetrack, and that the kitchen was the proper place for a woman. This was not a heckler in the crowd. It was a professional racing journalist, printed in newspapers across the continent, treating a decorated Olympic athlete's ambition as an intrusion to be laughed off. The men who covered the sport helped set the terms a woman would be received on before she ever reached the gate. She had not yet sat on a single racehorse in a real race. The welcome was already written, and it pointed at the kitchen. Number 18, the opposition from inside. Not all of the resistance came from men. Judy Johnson, a horsewoman who had herself been granted a provisional license to ride over jumps during the labor shortages of the Second World War, went on record against Kusner's bid to ride. One of the very few women who had ever been allowed near the role publicly opposed the woman trying to open it for good. It is worth naming plainly because it shows how completely the sport had trained everyone in it to see a woman in the saddle as a problem to be solved. The exclusion did not need a villain in every chair. It only needed enough people, women included, to agree that this was simply how racing worked. Sometimes the door is held shut from both sides at once. Number 17, the Guild's position. The Jockeys Guild, the organization that represented professional riders, did not stay silent as women pressed to join. It issued a statement laying out its concerns about women competing against men and its reasons for opposing it. This mattered because the Guild was not a mob and not a crowd. It was the rider's own professional body, the institution that spoke for the workforce a woman was trying to enter. When it put its objection on the record, it gave the boycotts that followed a kind of cover, a sense that keeping women out was a considered professional position and not raw resentment. The body that existed to protect jockeys used its standing to argue that some jockeys did not belong. It spoke for the room. The room did not want her. Number 16, the reasons they gave. When Kathy Kusner applied to the Maryland Racing Commission for a license, the commission turned her down and then explained itself. It questioned her strength. It questioned her emotional stability. It questioned whether her status as an amateur Olympic rider even allowed it. What it did not question was whether she could ride, because everyone who had watched her knew that she could. This was the licensing body of the state, the official gatekeeper of the sport, and it reached for a woman's nerves and a woman's muscles as the grounds to keep her out. A judge eventually saw the reasons for what they were. In 1968, the court ruled the denial was sex discrimination and ordered the commission to grant the license it had withheld. The commission had the power to say who could ride. It used that power to say a decorated athlete could not, and it needed 3 excuses to do it. Number 15, the second fight. Winning in Maryland did not settle it. When Diane Crump set out to ride in Florida, she found that the Florida authorities would not simply honor what a Maryland court had already decided. The recognition did not carry across the state line, and no ruling from another state could force Florida's hand. She had to go through the process again and win a second time before Florida would let her ride. Consider what that meant. A woman could establish in a court of law that barring her was discrimination, and the very next state could still make her prove the whole thing from the beginning. Each jurisdiction was its own closed door, and clearing one only brought her to the next. The law had been made to bend once. The map made her bend it all over again. So far, not one of these needed a law. A columnist, a fellow horsewoman, the riders' own union, 2 state commissions, all arriving at the same answer without ever having to write it down. The sport did not keep women out with a single rule. It kept them out with a consensus, shared by nearly everyone already inside, that a woman on a racehorse was a problem to be managed. And when one woman finally beat that consensus in a courtroom, the win did not open the sport. It only moved her along to the next closed door. Number 14, the mounts she could not get. A jockey's license is only paper without a horse to ride. Naming a rider on a horse was the decision of owners and trainers, and through the late 1960s, most of them simply would not name a woman. A licensed woman could stand in the paddock, fully qualified, and watch every mount go to a man. This was not the track and not the commission. It was the people who controlled the horses, making a private choice that added up to a wall. Barbara Jo Rubin could not even get hired as an exercise rider until a relative threatened to pull his horses from a trainer's barn unless the man took her on. The license opened the door. The owners decided the door led nowhere. A qualification you are never allowed to use is not really a qualification at all. Number 13, the walk to work. Before a woman could ride, she had to be around the barns, and even the walk to work was made hostile. When Barbara Jo Rubin was learning the trade at Tropical Park, other workers on the backstretch would yell at her and throw things as she made her way to the barn in the mornings, for no reason other than that she was a woman who wanted to ride. This was not management and not policy. It was the daily climate of the workplace, set by the men who shared it, and it started long before she ever reached a race. She kept walking. She groomed horses and walked hot ones for free to learn the job. The abuse was the toll charged for showing up. She paid it every morning and went to work anyway. Number 12, the ladies' race. When tracks did make room for women, they sometimes made a separate room. In April 1969, Suffolk Downs staged the Lady Godiva Handicap, a race open only to women, 7 female riders set against each other rather than against the men. On its face, it was an opportunity. In practice, it was a way to let women ride while keeping them out of the real cards, a sideshow with its own name and its own fence around it. Women had ridden in separate novelty races for decades, treated as a curiosity rather than as competition. Putting the women in their own event let a track say it had welcomed them without ever seating them in the races that counted. The women got a race of their own. The men kept the racetrack. Number 11, the passing fad. At Pimlico, the general manager of the track, Chick Lang, looked at the first women trying to ride and decided the whole thing was a passing fad. Part of that calculation was money. Letting women ride would mean building a women's changing room, and the track did not want to spend on something it expected to fade. So the hope, stated plainly by the man who ran the place, was that women would simply go away before the track had to build anything for them. The barrier here was not a rule. It was a budget line, and a bet that a woman's ambition was too small a thing to spend money on. It was cheaper to wait her out than to build for her. They were counting on her to quit. She did not. Number 10, no room of her own. When women finally did ride, the tracks had nowhere to put them. There were no women's facilities because the sport had never planned for a woman to need one. On the day she made history at Hialeah, Diane Crump had no jockey's room. She dressed in an office. At other tracks, it was a first aid room or a trailer in the parking lot. She was not allowed to use the men's quarters, with their showers and their scales and their place to rest between races. There was no equivalent anywhere for her. She made do in whatever room the track could spare that afternoon, because there was nowhere else for her to go. She was a licensed professional doing the same job as the men beside her. The men had a jockey's room. She had an empty office. The job was hers. The building was not built for her. Notice what changed once the license was real. The sport could no longer keep her out by saying no, so it kept her out by other means. No horse to ride, no room to dress in. A separate race with her name on the fence. The barrier stopped being a rule she could challenge and became 100 small arrangements she could not. A woman with every legal right to be there could still be made to feel she was trespassing in a building that simply refused to make any space for her. Number 9, the whisper. When Barbara Jo Rubin earned her license, some of the men who did not want her riding did not stop at refusing to ride with her. They spread a story that she had been granted her license only because of an affair with an influential track official. It was not true. It was a rumor built to explain away a woman's qualification as something other than skill, to turn an achievement into a scandal. This is one of the oldest tools used against a woman who succeeds in a man's field. Her competence is recast as a favor she must have traded for. She had passed the same gait test the men passed. One steward said she rode as well as anybody. None of that traveled as fast as the whisper did. The test she passed was public. The lie about it was quieter, and it moved faster. Number 8, the threat to the owners. The male riders had another way to keep a woman off the track without ever touching her directly. They went after the owners. The jockeys declared that they would refuse to ride for any owner who put a woman on one of his horses. It was a boycott aimed sideways. An owner who wanted to name a woman now had to weigh whether doing so would cost him every other rider in the colony. For most owners, that was enough. Why risk your whole stable on one principal choice? One owner, Brian Webb, called the bluff and kept his rider, and the threat did not hold. But the pressure was real, and it was built to make a woman radioactive to the very people whose horses she needed. Freeze her out by freezing out anyone who might hire her. Number 7, the polite request. Not every barrier was a shout or a boycott. Some were delivered quietly by the people in charge. Diane Crump was asked by the management of Churchill Downs not to ride at their track, so as to avoid the controversy the jockey colony was making over women riders. Read that again. The track did not tell the protesting men to stand down. It asked the woman to disappear. Faced with a group of riders who did not want a woman on the grounds, the easier path for management was to remove the woman, not the resistance. It was framed as avoiding trouble. What it actually did was make the trouble hers to solve. By leaving, it cost the track nothing and cost her the track. The controversy was not hers. Only the request to vanish was. Number 6, the scratch. Faced with riders who would not ride against a woman, a track had a choice. It could discipline the men breaking the rules, or it could remove the woman who had followed them. At Churchill Downs in 1968, when Penny Ann Early was named on horses and the jockeys balked, the track's officials chose to take her off. They scratched her mounts. The races she was entered in were scrapped rather than run with her in them, and the men who had refused to work kept their standing untouched. Think about where the cost landed. The people breaking the arrangement paid nothing. The woman keeping to every rule lost her ride. The easiest thing for the track to remove was always going to be her. so she was what they removed. Number 5, the Guild in the Room. The resistance to Barbara Jo Rubin at Tropical Park was not a spontaneous flare-up. It was organized. The Jockeys Guild, the rider's own professional body, worked to keep her from riding. Riders were brought in from New York and California, and the Guild was there on the grounds, turning a local objection into a coordinated stand. This is what lifted the tropical boycott above a few angry men in a changing room. An institution put its weight behind shutting her out and used its reach to make sure the shutout held. A single track's riders might have folded. A national body sending in reinforcements did not. The Guild existed to defend jockeys. At Tropical Park, it spent that strength making sure one licensed jockey never got to be one. It organized the door shut, and then it staffed it. From here, the objection stops being paperwork. Until now, the door was held shut with rules, rumors, and budgets. What follows was held shut with people, coordinated boycotts, a brick, a crowd the police had to hold back. The men who could not stop her on paper set about stopping her in person. Blocked at home, some women left to ride in Nassau and Mexico because they could not get a fair start here. The last thing in her way was not a rule. It was a crowd of people who would not step aside. Number 4, the crowd at the rail. On February 7, 1969, Diane Crump walked to the paddock at Hialeah to ride in the first pari-mutuel race a woman had ever ridden in this country. She did not walk alone. She needed a police escort to get her through the crowd because the crowd had come to jeer. People shouted at her to go back to the kitchen and cook dinner. Objects were thrown. A young woman on her way to do her job, fully licensed, cleared to ride by the stewards, had to be shielded by police from the people who had bought tickets to watch. This was not a rule and not a boycott. It was open hostility from the paying public, aimed at a woman for the offense of sitting on a horse. She rode the race and finished it. Then she walked back through the same crowd, and some of them, having seen her ride, cheered. The police walked her in. She earned the walk out on her own. Number 3, the boycott. The clearest picture of who was keeping women out is what the male riders did at Churchill Downs when Penny Ann Early was named to ride. They refused. As a group, the jockeys declared they would not ride in any race she was entered in, and they held that line 3 separate times. These were her fellow professionals, the people who shared her trade and her weighing room, and their answer to a licensed woman joining them was to shut the racing down rather than let her compete. It was not the rule book that stopped her here. It was the men who already had what she was asking for. Colleagues she had never even raced against decided in advance that she could not be allowed to try. 3 times she was ready to ride. 3 times the men she would have ridden against walked the sport to a halt to keep her out of it. Number 2, the brick through the window. At Tropical Park in January 1969, Barbara Jo Rubin was using a trailer as a changing room because there was nowhere else for a woman to dress. While the boycott against her raged, someone threw a brick through the window of that trailer. It came, she said, from the direction of the jockeys' quarters. This was no longer an argument about rules or licenses. This was a woman alone in a trailer, having a brick thrown through the glass beside her for wanting to ride a horse. One rider did that, but he did it inside a climate that a great many people had built and were protecting, a climate that had already told her, in 100 quieter ways, that she was not wanted. The brick was just the loudest version of a message she had been getting for months. The glass broke. She still meant to ride. Number 1, the walkout. On January 15, 1969, at Tropical Park, Barbara Jo Rubin was fully licensed, named on a horse, and ready to make history in front of a record crowd that had come precisely to see it. Then roughly 100 male jockeys refused to come out and ride. After a meeting in the jockeys' quarters, they would not take the track unless she was pulled from her mount. Under that pressure, the trainer withdrew her, and the men got their way. Sit with the picture. A qualified professional, cleared by the state, ready at the gate, and 100 of her peers shutting the entire card down rather than let her ride a single race against them. She had beaten the rule book. She had beaten the court's delays. She had beaten every excuse the commissions could invent. And she was still turned away at the last step, not by a law, but by the men already inside the job, who simply refused to make room. The door was open. They stood in it. On a February afternoon in 1969, a 20-year-old woman walked toward a starting gate behind a line of police, while people who had paid to be there shouted at her to go home. Diane Crump rode the race anyway. 2 weeks later, at Charlestown, Barbara Jo Rubin crossed the wire first, the first woman to win one of these races against men. The people who tried to stop them were not monsters. They were commissioners applying old assumptions, riders defending a trade they thought was theirs, officials taking the easy path. That is usually how a thing this large stays standing so long, and all of it is on the record. Court rulings that name the discrimination, commission files, newspaper accounts of the boycotts, the riders' own words about why they would not ride. They called it the way racing had always been done. What it actually was an ordinary workplace that had quietly decided a woman could not earn a living inside it. Did a woman in your family ever fight her way into a job that was closed to her? Tell me what she was up against.